Welcome back, everyone, to Pontos Fathom Press. This is our Pontos Fathom podcast, episode number 77. Today we're going to deep dive into George R.R. Martin's world of fire and blood. We'll be talking about a specific aspects of the dragons that appears in George R.R. Martin's work. We'll also talk a little bit about how the television series House of the Dragon is interpreting this aspect of the dragons, and that is the Dragonkeepers, sort of these dragon handlers, and we'll also kind of look at this in some other texts. Maybe for the extra bonus part at the end of the video, we'll jump into some of the some of the writing and literature out there that kind of grounds these dragon traditions. And I'm going to specifically say the European dragon tradition for this case, because I think Martin's work is sort of like in that tradition, but there are other ones. There's all kinds of dragon traditions through Mesoamerica, through Asia. So what we're going to focus on, maybe for this video, we'll focus on the Western tradition. But first off, let's talk a little bit about the dragon handlers themselves. So the dragon handlers are kind of an order of guards that were introduced in Fire and Blood, probably in Game of Thrones. I think they mentioned in Game of Thrones. I think Ned Stark sees the Dragonkeepers' armor or something like that in the original Game of Thrones book. But in centuries before Game of Thrones, as the cover says, we've got George R.R. Martin's book Fire and Blood, the history of Targaryen kings from Aegon the Conqueror to Aegon the Third. And the Dragonkeepers were kind of the order of guards that were handlers and protectors of the dragons under the Targaryen kings, mainly around Dragonstone and the Dragon's Pit, say at King's Landing. So I think that if we go initially into the book, the initial sort of maybe mention of the dragon handlers goes back to in Fire and Blood. There's a section here called Birth and Triumphs and Tragedies, Jaehaerys and Alysanne. I think this is 231. It's probably here. 231. Basically, the dragon keepers were numbered at 77 men that were tasked with guarding the dragons day and night, wherever they lair, right? And I think this is coming out of that time of King Jaehaerys, right? So in the initial version of them, these 77 dragon keepers had, they wore suits of armor. They had this black armor, and their helms were created with rows of dragon scales that they had. So they had this very elaborate armor, and this is that armor I was talking about that you'd see Ned Stark talk about. But I think what happens, though, is following some of that, dragon keepers were basically founded by King Jaehaerys the First to prevent the theft of a dragon. I think initially Balerion was taken from Princess Arya after she died, and the dragon was taken to Westeros. I believe that is here in this section, that Princess Arya's dragon was stolen. So why Jaehaerys set up the dragon riders in the book was definitely as a way to sort of prevent theft of dragons, prevent theft of dragon eggs, and also to care for the dragons. And then there's also a thing in 60 AC with the original Princess Daenerys Targaryen during this time of the Shivers, that the dragon riders, the dragon keepers were also employed. Basically, Jaehaerys ordered a raven was sent to the dragon keepers on Dragonstone so that so they can bring a hatchling to King's Landing at once, because this was when after Princess Daenerys died, Jaehaerys flew to Dragonstone on Vermithor and to tell them that they no longer had to send out that dragon egg. So this is the idea of getting a dragon egg to basically back to no longer needed for that, right? So the Dragonkeepers were kept at the dragon pits in King's Landing, and they knew the dragons better than anyone else, right? So these are the guards that actually, you see there's a quote in this section here. It says, in 72 AD, a tourney was held in Duskendale in honor of the young Lord Darkland's wedding to the daughter Manderly. Both of the young princes attended, together with their sister Alyssa, competing with the squire's melee. Prince Aemon emerged victorious and part of a dint, hammering his brothers into submission. Later, he distinguished himself in the lists. With knighthood now achieved, the prince wasted no time becoming a dragon rider. He was at the age of 17. He ascended into the sky for the first time not long after his return to King's Landing. His mount was blood-red Caraxes, fiercest of all the young dragons in the dragon pit. So this was at 72 AC. The Dragonkeepers, who knew the denizens of the pit better than anyone, called him the Bloodworm. So here you have a reference to the Dragonkeepers nicknaming the dragons. Okay, and so according to the Dragonkeepers, when Princess Alyssa Targaryen came to power, or came to the dragon pit in 75 AC, and I think this is in the next footnote here, Princess Alyssa, Balon the Brave was not far behind his brother Aemon. Balon and Alyssa now wait to consummate their union. Alyssa... The princess was seldom away from the dragon pit after that day, flying with the second sweetest thing in the world, she would often say, and the very sweetest thing could not be mentioned in the company of ladies. It said, Aemon had flown at 17, Balon at 16. Alyssa meant to do it at 15. According to the tale set down by the Dragonkeepers, it was all that they could do to persuade her not to claim Balerion. He was old and slow, princess. Surely you want a more swifter mount. In the end, they prevailed, and Princess Alyssa ascended to the sky on Meles, a splendid scarlet she-dragon never before ridden. Red maidens, the two of us, the princess boasted, laughing. Now we've both been mounted. So the Dragonkeepers had not been wrong. Meles was a swift dragon, as swift a dragon as Westeros has ever seen, even outpacing Caraxes and Vhagar when she and her brothers flew together. So here you have lore from the Dragonkeepers actually influencing which dragon the different Targaryens would go after. So again, this is kind of gives them... Now, it's never called out in Fire and Blood that it's a mystical order. But one thing that's interesting about the House of the Dragons show is in the series House of the Dragon, they definitely interpret the dragons a bit differently. I think that in that show, they kind of show the dragons to be... the Dragonkeepers to be kind of more like a monastic order. Give you guys a dragon picture while we talk on this. So, they're kind of like a monastic order. Their heads are shaved. They're wearing monk-like clothing. And they also, we saw that they carry the dragon glass dagger. And they have these staffs that they... So we've seen them since episode 1. Like even the very first season 1, episode 1, we saw Rhaenyra, young Rhaenyra, arriving on her dragon. And the Dragonkeepers speaking High Valyrian. They're escorting her off the mount. And then they're escorting the dragon back into sort of the dragon pits. We also see them when there is a training session between the kids. There's Jacaerys and Lucerys and Aemon and Aegon. They're the Dragonkeepers are seen there as well, and they're kind of speaking in High Valyrian. They're teaching the kids how to say Dracarys and things like this, right? So in the TV show, I think that they're originally going to have the armor, right? But I think that they kind of opted for, I think it was a budgetary reason actually at first. They didn't want to have all these armor that is described in the book, so they kind of simplified it. And then George R.R. Martin kind of actually gave it his blessing. So he kind of went and said, this new depiction of the Dragonkeepers is kind of cool. And they also have that, you've seen in episodes why the dragon glass dagger is there when things go wrong, sort of. So I think there's also female Dragonkeepers in this series, if I'm not mistaken. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong down below. But yeah, so going back to the book version of it, the Dragonkeepers, so they're the ones who not only guarding the dragons, but they're ones that are training the dragons. They're training the dragon riders. And we do see this kind of conflict in the most recent episode, where actually the Dragonkeepers were quite offended by the idea of the dragon seeds being sourced by Princess Rhaenyra from the ranks of the common folk or the bastards, right? So I think by the time of the Dance with Dragons, when we get to the Dance with Dragons, where we are in the TV series, but by the time we get to the Dance of Dragons, we actually, the number of dragon riders, the number of Dragonkeepers is reduced to almost only 50. So you've got to think that there's some on Dragonstone, and there are some on in King's Landing, right? Because they have the dragon pits, and a number of those dragons are there. So I think this is like a kind of a position where we start to see what will become of the dragons is even the Dragonkeepers are part of this loss that's going to happen. And you see that in the one thing that I thought was very interesting in the series was that the Dragonkeepers were very offended by opening up. They're kind of apolitical, right? They were very offended by having the dragon riders be associated with the common folk, because suddenly now it was like it was no longer a sacred act to mount the dragons or to ride the dragons. So you think of like all the Dragonkeepers, they have these duties, they have almost a monastic order, kind of makes sense, where they are the guardians of the dragons, and the dragons are also the sort of the symbols of the magic of Westeros, let's say, or of Old Valyria, or of the Targaryen legacy, something like this. So something about the old dragon mythos, like the mythology of the dragons. Now I thought like maybe we could go look into a bit of how did we get to that kind of view of the dragons. So if we look at, for example, I wanted to pull out Flying Serpents and Dragons, a story of mankind's reptilian past by R.A. Boulay. This book kind of goes into some of this dragon power, and I wanted to go to Western or European dragons. Right, Western or European dragons 31. So if we go here in 31, it says, so you can see that there's different kinds of medieval dragons. And you can see there's also like the two-legged and the four-legged type, 2- and 4-legged dragons in the medieval documents. Those with wings we classify as merely monsters. However, in certain instances, the non-winged serpent is usually represented the dragon, such as in ancient Egypt. So there's winged and non-winged, two-legged and four-legged. I think that we see the two-legged are different even than these, because the wings are actually the arms of the dragon, right? So the wings are technically, let's get a dragon on the table and you guys can see. The wings are technically like gigantic hands extending on the dragon. So let's just take this dragon, for example, this model dragon here. You can see it's a two-legged dragon. I'll give you a view of the dragon here first. At this two-legged dragon. And then you can see underneath that the fingers are kind of like the wing bits. This one has an elbow that extends, but you can kind of get the idea that at least some of this has to do with fingers. So it's an arm, the wing is the arm and the hands. And then you see some appendages are for the elbows, for the fingers. This one is interpreted this way. Some other ones just have the finger as actually the appendage. So you can see this dragon's face. If you guys are interested in this kind of stuff, you can go check out our other channel as well. We've got a hobbies channel. We do wargaming, miniature painting. Go check that out. Also check out our bookstore while we're talking about checking things out. We've got a Patreon. Lots of great books out on our bookstore for sale. Quick plug before we go on. Maybe we can just talk about there's still 2 books out on the table. The Cat 2 Journals out of Lovecraft's Providence, deep dive into Lovecraftian lore, and we've got the Alchemy of Anthroposophy in the Dune saga. If you guys are interested in this topic, we do have the podcast version of Esoteric Dragon Mysteries, Decoding the Dragon Symbol in Myth and Occult Tradition. So you can check all those out in our bookstore link down below. Thank you guys. Like and subscribe. Leave some comments below. Okay, let's jump back into it. So Flying Serpents and Dragons, page 31. Said the dragon's body is covered with the greenish scales, the underside is yellow and bright. Whatever the caves existed, they were likely to be dragons, whose serpent nature found refuge and comfort in the dark, cold solitude. So, also though, dragons, a couple of stories of other sort of handlers of dragons. And I'm going to lump in something like a St. Francis, right? So the unfortunate dragon of Rhodes. Legends about dragons became established in Europe during the Middle Ages. One of the famous is that of the dragon of Rhodes, located in the Mediterranean near Anatolia. The Isle of Rhodes was held by the Knights Hospitalier of St. John, who seized it after being expelled from the Holy Lands by the Muslims in 1309. The best knights of the order lost their lives when they tried to slay the dragon. So in order to prevent further decimation of the order, the Grand Master placed a ban on any further attempts by his knights. Nevertheless, the young knight from Provence called Theodore, anxious to prove his mettle in the battle, resolved to ignore the bane and slay the beast. Disregarding the explicit order of the Grand Maester, he attacked the dragon with lance and sword, accompanied by 2 trained bulldogs. As he neared the beast, it rushed forth to meet him with fiery breath and venom dripping from its jaws. Theodore struck the dragon with his spear, and the dragon, with a blow, knocked him to the ground. His faithful dog charged the beast from beneath. The dragon, maddened with pain, reared up in the air, trying to shake off the dogs, and with one last blood-curdling scream, fell dead at the feet of Theodore from his... and it fell to the ground in agony, black blood gushing forth from its wound, after he had drove the sword into its unprotected belly. But it seems that all the medieval tales have a moral to them. Like there's always this rash youth who slays the dragon. Theodore's triumph was complete in the time he became a Grand Master of the Order of the Knights of St. John. So you can see that there's this kind of connection, although this is dragon slaying and not dragon tending. You can see that some of these orders have kind of a dragon story to them, right? So there's another one, the medieval dragon of Beaucaire. The medieval French, perhaps the most famous of dragons in that area, was called Drac. One day, a young wife from the town went down to the river with her infant son to wash clothes. As they labored at the edge of the river, she noticed a golden cup and a large pearl. She reached for it, but doing so lost her balance and fell into the river. Into the wading claws of the dragon, it promptly took her down into the sea to its crystal cavern where the dragon had a brood of its own. There the young wife was obliged to remain for 7 years to nurse and tend to the hatchings of the dragons. So here we have a story from France of the first sort of dragon keeper. She remained there for 7 years to nurse and tend to the hatchlings of the dragon. After that period of time, when the dragons were fully grown and able to fend for themselves, she was released by the grateful parent dragon, returned to the village of Beaucaire with the pearl as her reward. And again, there's friendly dragons from the Alpine region of France. Dragon stories, one of the most popular of these, were called the Voivre, the Vipera, the Voivoids. So the Voivoids are going to come back to us also, because the dragon is going to be like Dracul, which is Dracula. It was said that they flew, its scales sparkled like diamonds. And there was one night, however, the dragon became vulnerable, and as it left its cave and flew to the nearby lake to bathe and drink, it encountered a precarious red stone, Without the precious ruby, the dragon was blind and helpless. Although the folk of the countryside knew its weakness, no one was brave enough to approach the dragon, much less steal the red jewel. It was said that deprived the sight of the dragon, it would languish and die. Apparently, no person was daring enough to seize and profit from its treasure. Or was it because there was a deep affection for the local dragon? So again, these are Dragonkeeper stories. It's not that they didn't... maybe it's not that they didn't want to slay the dragon. They wanted to take care of their local dragon, right? So again, you have this is even in the House of the Dragon show, they have this kind of economy of everybody wants a dragon, right? Another story from the Alpine town of a barrel maker. They used the caves to place his barrels for wine. However, in exploring the caves, they turned out to be the home of two winged dragons who seemed quite sympathetic to the barrel maker. They allowed him to live there for the winter months, where he spent cold nights wrapped in the warmth of their coils. When spring came, the dragons grew restless and spread their wings. As they flew out of the chasm, the barrel maker seized the tail of one and was carried out to freedom. Eventually, he made his way home, where he became a local hero. So again, we have a dragon caretaker, dragon friend, and also a dragon rider, all in one sort of story. So you see that there's lots of these stories. There's also druidic stories of the druids, and that these lays, or like the ley lines, you've probably heard of ley lines. So there's a theory that is prevalent in England throughout the ages of the lines of energy called lays, connecting various ancient shrines, barrows, monoliths, and stone circles. These lays were believed to be the ancient druids, the actual dragon paths. At first, they were used by druids and Celts in the trade routes. According to the English chronicler Geoffrey of Monmouth, it sounds like Sir Jorah of Mormont, right? Geoffrey of Monmouth. In the history of the kings, or Jorah of Mormont, in his histories of the kings of Britain, nobles were buried in these barrows that are connected with the ley lines. Geoffrey implicitly links the barrows with the giant stone circles of Stonehenge. The investigator of the ley lines is a vigorous ongoing work in England that promises to uncover the new signs of earth energy. A similar net of energy lines found in China, where they're called the dragon paths of Lung Mei. And this is sort of related to sort of yin-yang. The place where two ley lines meet is supposed to be a magical place, and for centuries, buildings were never erected without first investigating and identifying those dragon lines in order to make sure the building was located in a favorable location. So here you go. You've got a number of sort of precursors to the Dragonkeepers, and some precursors to dragon riders, and even to the management of the dragons, right? And I think all of these kind of come together perhaps most classically in the, obviously there's a St. George story of slaying the dragon, which is I think is kind of similar to the Dance of the Dragons, right? It's dragon on dragon crime kind of thing, but it's St. George as the dragon slayer. We don't see lots of dragon slaying in the House of the Dragon or in Fire and Blood. We see more of dragons versus dragons. But then we have the ultimate kind of dragon keeper, I guess, maybe goes back to the Pendragons, right? So King Arthur, his father's name was Uther Pendragon, right? So according to Geoffrey of Monmouth, again, the first British king after the departure of the Romans was one Vortigern, who called himself the High King of Britain. He fought off the Saxons. As recounted in the legend, no matter how hard his masons worked during the day, the foundation of the castle sank to the ground at night. Brought in to solve the problem, the Merlin, the chief druid of the time, explained to the king that the foundation of the castle rested on a subterranean cavern where two dragons slept during the day and fought each other at night, and the caverns caused the foundation to be unsteady and the stones to collapse. So again, this is kind of like, this really reminds me of the doom of Valeria, right? So the idea that the land is unstable due to the dragons beneath the land, right? So the other one is Vortigern and his men excavated the site and found the lair of dragons. As one story goes, one monster was white, which Merlin symbolized as the Saxon invaders, and one was red. Thus, the red dragon not only became the symbol of Wales, but also the badge of Uther Pendragon, the father of King Arthur, the Pendragon meaning the chief or great dragon. Thus, the legends make King Arthur the descendant of dragons, similar to the claim of the emperors of China and the kings of Sumer, and to the Targaryens from that point of view. And to emphasize his dragon lineage, King Arthur's helmet was adorned with the head of a dragon. The Welsh classic Mabinogion was, I don't know how to pronounce that, sorry guys, you probably can tell me the pronunciation, the credits, in the comments. It also relates to the story of Merlin's dragons. It tells how those two dragons have been a nuisance to the people in the area, which we see also in the House of the Dragon or in Fire and Blood, where these sheep stealers and dragons, even in Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire, we saw that the dragons would be eating the local flocks. So we have a similar thing here. Nuisance to the people of the area for centuries before the reign of Vortigern. They appeared above the pit and fought each other in the sky until they fell exhausted to the ground. According to the legend, Vortigern was besieged by Ambrosius, the last of the Roman leaders who destroyed the castle. The brother of Ambrosius was called Uther Pendragon because when he was born, a fiery dragon appeared in the sky. So the dragon also appears prominently in the exploits of the Knights of the Round Table, where Lancelot appeared. The king begged him for his aid. His kingdom was beset by a dragon, King Pelias, when he ventured out at night to maim and slaughter his people. The gallant Lancelot went to the lair of the dragon, and when it burst out upon him, he slew it with his sword. King Pelias was deeply grateful. So again, we have these stories of people interacting with dragons, kind of like the Dragonkeepers. But then if we take this on to, so that was from Flying Serpents and Dragon, the story of mankind's reptilian past. But then we've got the classic, which we've talked about before on this channel, the works of Lawrence Gardner. This is Realm of the Ring Lords. Maybe first we'll go a little bit more into the origins of the Pendragon reference. The Pendragons 91. Excalibur and the Red Dragon. The Scythians. Again, the Scythians are like Targaryens, right? The Targaryen Scythians. The Sarmatian body armor was constructed from small scale-like plates, tarnished a greenish color, giving the warriors the appearance of lizards, whereas the 2nd century Greek geographer Pausanias referred to them as dragons. So the Scythians were the dragons. Scythia, Samartia, the Black Sea, and the dragons, right? In Mallory's book, The Mort to Arthur from 1485, twice disobeyed King Arthur, casting Excalibur into the Lady of the Lake. The original military banner of the Sarmatians was a dragon, so the Tartarian flag is also that. The Tartarian flag is a dragon. It's the same dragon that you actually see in the Russian flag. It's like they have a small conquered dragon in the middle, which is sort of the Tartarian one. That's the Scythians as well. Then the Romans withdraw from Britain in 410. Having assumed control by AD 418, Vortigern, the Welsh king, was elected Pendragon of the island Pendraco Insularis 7 years later, reintroducing the Sarmatian banner device, which had since been the famous red dragon on the national flag of Wales. So Arturius means bear-like. King Arthur is Arturius. The name is a wholly Irish, emerging from the Scythian Milesian Artur, the king of Art, Cormac, and Artur. So again, we have dragon handlers. The subject of King Arthur is dealt with at length in Bloodline of the Holy Grail. Oh. We have it in the Bloodline of the Holy Grail too. Where it's explained in spite of all the literary speculations. One was Arthur Dryfed. Let's just go quickly look at the Bloodline of the Holy Grail for 1 second. In the Bloodline of the Holy Grail, we've also got some extra bonus stuff here. The Merovingians, Arthurians, the Arthurian descent. 197. 197. 197. So again, bloodlines are important, and it seems like in a lot of this work, right? We talk about the Targaryen bloodlines, but with the dragon handlers, with the Dragonkeepers, we wonder: is the TV show actually onto something? Are they like an order? Is there, here's Geoffrey of Mormonth, the other world of Celtic tradition, Avalon. Beyond the Western Sea, there's a mystic isle. There's a second coming of the king. If you guys are interested in this, we're also playing a game on the other channel called Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon, which kind of goes into some of this topics. But yeah, I think that's about it for the Arthur connection. But I also wanted to go back to Realm of the Ring Lords, the myth and magic of the Grail quest, because it talks about another group that I feel fits with the Dragonkeeper story, and that is the Dracula, the Dracula story, right? So if we go to 237, 237. Dracula. Okay, so first we start out with Bram Stoker. So Bram Stoker, who was immediately transformed his Austrian Count Vampire to the Transylvanian Count Dracula. He also used Wilkinson's text to ascribe unlimited information of the world of the scholarly Dutch vampire hunter Dr. Abraham van Helsing. His Dracula must have indeed been a voivod. Dracula, who in his name... Now, voivod, we just heard that name before, that it's related to a dragon, right? So, if it has to be so, he has no common man for the time. The century has spoke, the cleverest and most cunning. While Stoker was not just a wonderful ring of name with Dracula, hence he deduced the voivod Dracula means devil prince. And this was more perfect for his project. But in fact, however, the Dracula, more precisely Draculae, actually means a son of Dracul. But Dracul is the Latin Draco, which means dragon. So it's the son of the dragon, is Dracula. Right? So when he was called Dracul, the Wallachian princes of Romania, and his two sons were Voivod Vlad II and Vlad III, known as Dracula. So he was the Dracul, Vlad II, and the Dracula was Vlad III. Wallachia was a Romanian province north of the river Danube. Though there is a nominal reference to Vlad in Francis Ford Coppola's 92 film, Bram Stoker's Dracula, the fact that the name of this Romanian prince does not appear anywhere in Stoker's book is a matter of speculation. But the idea is, I've asked my friend Arminius of Budapest University to make the record. For all that means, he tells me of what he, Dracul, has been. He must indeed have been named that voivod Dracula, who won his name against the Turks. Stoker does reference Dracula as winning against the Turks. And this is evidence that Vlad III was a sobriquet Dracula. Used the sobriquet Dracula since it's featured in the 15th and 16th century in his own signature. So with Dracula as the son of the dragon, we go on to a section of the Society of the Dragon. And this is where it gets interesting. Vlad III was born to the Wallachian princes, and he was introduced in February 8th, the year of his son's birth in Transylvania, inducted to the Society of the Dragon by Sigismund von Luxembourg, King of Hungary. Vlad II, Lord Draconis, from which derived his sobriquet Dracul, the dragon, and his son Vlad II, who inherited the dragon office from his father's pledge, became Dracula, the son of the dragon. So now we sort of have a society of dragons, right? The court provided a foundation for the priestly pursuits associated with this patronage. It was later established a formal pharaonic institution of the Hungarian Society of the Dragon could be identified in the dragon court of ancient Egypt under the patronage of the priest prince Ankhefen Khonsu in 2170 BC, and it was later established more formally as a pharaonic institution by the 12th dynasty of Queen Soberknefru in 1785 BC, and its mission was much like that of the present-day Royal Academy, being a unique assembly of science and scholarship. So it sounds like the maesters in the George Martin world, but maybe that there's a place here for the Society of the Dragon to overlap with the Dragonkeepers. Right, the court provided a foundation for priestly pursuits with the teachings of Thoth, who had prevailed from the time of King Reineb, a pharaoh of the second dynasty and the grandson of the biblical Nimrod. Reineb gained power in 2852, about 3 centuries before the Giza pyramids. The temples were therefore known as places of worship rather than worship as the modern sense. And they incorporated the alchemy or alchemical workshop of the master craftsman. It was under the obligation of these masters that the temple priests were to maintain the spiritual welfare of the pharaohs while ensuring the purity of continuing royal bloodline which progressed through the dragon queens of the matrilinear Grail succession. Unfortunately, however, much of the old wisdom was lost in the great empires of Persia, Macedonia, and Rome when they took their successive holds on the Mediterranean world. So here it's very interesting, right? So here we have a historical kind of a semi-historical record of the idea of the Royal Society of Dragons, linking back to ancient Egypt, and their idea was to continue the purity of the bloodline which progressed through the dragon queens and the matrilinear Grail succession. So even in George R.R. Martin's Dragonkeepers, but this is what's great about the House of the Dragon versions. The Dragonkeepers were very offended that non-Targaryens were going to ride the dragons. It's because they held, and this is a great quote from George R.R. Martin, they held that the dragons were the last of the magic in this sad world. This is a House of the Dragon quote. I don't think it's in the book. I think it's, and guys, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. He says the Dragonkeepers of Rhaenyra, when she's bringing the dragon seeds there to try to find a new dragon rider. Season 2, episode 7, spoilers. The dragon riders, the Dragonkeepers are offended. They said, these dragons are the last connection to the dying magic of this sad world, right? And I think you see a sort of a similar concept here with this court. It says the temples were places of worship rather than worship in the modern sense, where they incorporated the alchemical workshop of the master craftsman. It was the obligation of these masters and the temple priests to maintain the spiritual welfare of the pharaohs, ensuring the purity of a continuing royal bloodline through the progression of the dragons. It says, having inherited the ancient legacy of the dragon court, long afterwards, on 13 December 1408, he drew up a pact with 23 royals and nobles who swore to observe the true and pure fraternity with the Societas Draconis, the Society of the Dragon, a style which really became the Ordo Draconis, the Hungarian Sarkany Rend, the Order of the Dragon, and along with Sigmund, other officials of the court, etc., etc. Others prominent in the Societas Draconis were various kings. The order might wear the insignia of a dragon incurved into a circle with a red cross based upon the original emblem of the Rosicrucians. This is about the Rosicrucians, who identify with the Grail succession from the 4th millennia BC. The nature of the dragon is such that its princely traditions surmount the mundane constraints of denominational dispute. After all, King David, Solomon, and even Jesus were all pre-Christian dynasts of the Albigensian line. In any event, from the time being, the main concern of the order was to help protect regional Europe against the invading sultans of the Turkish Empire, Today, the Hungarian Order of the Dragons is registered at the High Court in Budapest as the Order Draconis from 1408. And it links back to the Carpathians, to the Maremites in Budapest, through the Merovingians, and such. I think maybe that's a good place to leave it. Dracula here, we see Vlad Dracul. We also see Vlad the Impaler. I think a lot of Martin's influence might come down to some of the cruelties of Vlad when he has his dragons at work. We see some Pendragon ring here. This is the Pendragon wing. We see the Sleeping Beauty there. Birth of Venus, Knights. Do we see a dragon picture here at all? The Nymphs. The Scythians. Here's the Scythians, kind of like the Dothraki. We have the dragon here. And we also have Lilith as a dragon, wrapped around a serpent around Lilith. And we have Sumerian. Okay, so that's going to just about do it. That's my kind of take on the Dragonkeepers. Hope that was interesting for you guys. Go check out the bookstore and the Patreon. Helps to support the channel. Really appreciate your comments below. We will do some more of these if you guys are interested in them. I have promised you guys a return to Philip K. Dick and the Targaryens and the simulation. Loving the simulation. We'll get back to that maybe next week. Anyway, guys, hope you're all doing well out there. Thanks for listening if you made it this far. I'll talk to you down in the comments, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.